Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices in a joint episode with Mormon Book Reviews. Stephen Pinnaker is here with me hosting, and we are going to be speaking today to Scott Wolter. Hello, Stephen, and hello, Scott.
How you doing?
I'm really excited. We'll be talking about the Bat Creek Inscription, which is a Paleo-Hebrew inscription that was discovered in a Smithsonian Institute archeological excavation in 1889. Stephen, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Okay, well, welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pinnaker, and I'm honored and privileged to do this joint collaboration with Nehemia. By the way, Nehemia, it's Pinnaker, so I'm not calling you Nehemiah anymore.
Okay, I don't mind you calling me Nehemia. Just don't call me Baldy. That's very sensitive.
Okay, so I just want to welcome Scott onto the program as well, and I'm really excited to be doing this this collaboration. And it's really fascinating because Nehemia, you're an expert in you're a scholar, and we're both very interested in the subject of Mormonism. Of course, you've been doing this epic interview recently with my good friend Dan Vogel, and
that was like a 7+ hour interview, so we ended up breaking it up into multiple episodes. We're about to broadcast the last episode. So.
That's great. I love it, and I want people to check out Nehemia's channel. For those of you who are interested in the Mormon studies and history, it's really a fascinating conversation he's having with Dan. And actually, it was my interview with Dan that kind of got you down that rabbit trail.
Absolutely.
And that's how we ended up becoming friends and collaborators. And, I think to an audience, specifically to a Latter-day Saint audience, who believe that the Book of Mormon is an ancient record of an ancient people that inhabited the American continent, okay? And there's this idea, people don't realize, they think that's just like a story about one people. There's actually, in the Book of Mormon, there's actually 3 transoceanic, I mispronounced that, migrations to the New World. We had the Jaredites around the fall of the Tower of Babel. And then we have what would become the Nephites and the Lamanites coming around 589 BC. And then we have the Mulekites also coming. So in the Book of Mormon, there's 3 that are talked about. So it makes, if we find something that, whether it is a relic that is from Book of Mormon times or not, it just makes the Book of Mormon plausible that there have been groups throughout history that have been coming across. And then not only that, but my friend Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation believes that that the Nephites were also diffusing across the continent as well, and to the old world. She believes specifically that the Dutch people are Nephites, so she thinks that I'm a Nephite. So it's really interesting just to hear these stories. The Book of Mormon talks about also shipbuilding and sending things out away from the New World into the Old World. So it's fascinating stuff. And honestly, I'm a big fan of our guest Scott, because you and the work that you've done with your show, America on Earth on the History Channel, is I've watched probably a vast majority of the episodes. And last night I got to reacquaint myself with your Bat Creek Stone episode that's been 10 years ago. I can't believe it. So it's amazing. And but yeah, so I think that it's really fascinating because you're not a Latter-day Saint. You don't have skin in this game, and that you have some kind of ideological reason why you'd want this to be a relic that might make the Book of Mormon plausible. Or that this could be a possible from the lost 10 tribes of Israel, one of those possibilities. You're just open to the facts, studying the rocks, and let the rocks speak. So I want to thank you, Nehemia. Let's get you started. Why don't you start off?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you joining us, Scott. My perspective and I'm sure there's some LDS and Mormons who watch my program and listen to the program, but probably the majority of them are interested more generally in Hebrew studies, which is my background. My PhD is in biblical studies, and I deal with the manuscripts. And I actually examined the Bat Creek inscription, not in the way that you did, but I got to see it for myself in 2000, was at the end of 2014. And so that was after the work you had done.
Right. Yeah. Right after. Yeah.
And actually, then it was under it was at this glass enclosure. It wasn't on display. Like, they brought me into the back room and opened up a box, but it was like mounted by the Smithsonian Institute. They told me this was at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian where I saw it.
Yep.
And it was mounted in this glass, it had glass on top, and then the bottom was like a mirror. So you actually got to examine it directly without the intervening glass, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
This is a heavy lift of what we're doing here. You're claiming that there is a pre-Columbian Hebrew Paleo-Hebrew inscription or authentic inscription, whatever language it is. So what looked at, for most archaeologists, it's prima facie, just the starting assumption is this is a fake. So let's start with what is the Bat Creek inscription, and then tell us why it's not a fake.
Well, you know, I sent you guys a PowerPoint, or excuse me, a PDF of a PowerPoint that I put together and presented actually at a Masonic Red Room presentation several years ago. It was 2018, and I just went through it again, and it brought back all these interesting memories about that work. But you know, when I was doing America on Earth, one of the things we were trying to do is find these different out of place artifacts and sites that we could investigate in a scientific manner and let the chips fall where they may. And the Bat Creek stone was one that came up fairly early, and I remember reading about it, and I actually have a list of the Smithsonian reports that going all the way back to the late 1800s. And in the 1894 volume is the Bat Creek report. And it's really interesting because when you read it from the standpoint of an archeological context, we're talking about something that was discovered by a professional, an agent with the Smithsonian Institution, who they had no reason to question the veracity of this dig, certainly not at the time. And what was interesting is when you study the history of it, it wasn't until the 1960s when a Chicago patent attorney, a woman by the name of Henrietta Mertz, took interest in the Bat Creek stone. And she went to the Smithsonian, she studied it, she actually turned it around because in the 1894 publication, it's displayed upside down if you want to read it as Paleo-Hebrew. And correct me or jump in if I make a mistake, because I'm certainly not an expert on Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew, but this is my understanding. So when she turned it around, apparently she thought she recognized what she thought were Phoenician characters, and then it was brought to the attention of Cyrus Gordon, who was a Semitic scholar, supposedly the top Semitic scholar around the time of 1970-71. And he published a report that said it wasn't Paleo-Cherokee is what they originally thought, that it was actually Paleo-Hebrew. And of course, this caused a huge controversy. And what I find so interesting and disappointing, and I've experienced this many times, is academics that immediately upon realizing something doesn't fit the accepted narrative, that, you know, nobody in the old world was here before Chris, right? Columbus in 1492, it has to be fake. And so the immediate reaction by academia and the Smithsonian was the Bat Creek stone was a fake. And they went a step further, and I think they really stepped in it when they made the accusation that John Emmert, who had already been dead for who knows how long, was the perpetrator. And as I began to understand the history of this artifact, it became more and more interesting. And I felt compelled that I wanted to get to the bottom of this story. And so I dug in, and I didn't just do it on America on Earth. I actually did it before we did that episode in real life. And let me tell you, it was a journey to say the least, because the Smithsonian Institute did everything they could to try to keep me from doing my examination. Because you got to remember, I'm the guy that validated the Kensington runestone. So I'm they came up with all kinds of names for me. But this is their technique. This is what they do. If they can't attack the evidence, they attack the person, right? So, yeah, this is just one more example of academia trying to distort, you know, the real history of what happened here. And the Bat Creek stone, in my opinion, is one of the Mount Rushmore of artifacts of pre-Columbian contact in North America. I'm not sure where you want to go at this point, but
let me ask you a couple follow-up questions of what you just said.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you talked about how the academics are, or let's say mainstream archaeologists. I hope that's not an offensive term, mainstream archaeologists. That's what they would consider themselves for sure. Well, maybe let's even go back further than that. What is your background to study this this artifact? Because basically the way you're presented, if I'm understanding you and from what I've read, is you're kind of you're presented as someone who doesn't have the credentials to study this, and you're obviously not part of mainstream archaeology by their definition of it. I think they call you a cult archaeologist or something like that. You quote that.
That's one of many names. Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me.
What is that? I don't even know what that means, but basically that's an ad hominem attack. I'm interested in the evidence, not But
Yeah.
but what are your qualifications?
Okay. Well, let me just tell you my background. I founded a laboratory in 1990 called American Petrographic Services, which is a sister company to American Engineering and Testing. And that's when we started our operations. And basically what I do is in our laboratory, we do material forensics, essentially autopsies, if you will, on concrete and rock. And so the bulk of our business is looking at problematic concrete. If you place a slab and it cracks, or it has low strength, or the top peels off, or there's some type of catastrophic failure, they will take samples of the concrete, send it to us in our lab. We will perform the autopsy, if you will. It's called a petrographic analysis. And we will diagnose what caused the problem. And of course, at that point, they want to know who's responsible, right? Who's going to pay? So we get involved in a lot of litigation, and I've testified as an expert witness many times. But I work in the professional field. I am a licensed geologist. And so, it's interesting because when we start talking about the academic world, they come after me like I'm some type of donkey that has no qualifications for looking at these things. I'm a geologist, okay? I was formally trained in the scientific method. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I've concluded after all of this is that the people that are accusing me of not understanding scientific method are the ones that are the soft scientists, right? The social scientists, which includes archaeology, anthropology, history, language, runes, dialect, grammar. These are not hard science fields. And so when I look at the work that has been done on these various artifacts by these academics in the past, it's terrible. It's not scientific. And, basically, in my view, and I'm being a little bit hard on them, but essentially this is what I see in academia that I've worked with, is they basically reach truth by consensus. In other words, they sit around and talk about it until they all agree. Now, there may or may not be good, hard, scientific, factual evidence to support the conclusion that they've drawn, but in some cases there is, but in many cases there isn't. The Bat Creek stone is a good example of one that isn't, from the standpoint of the conclusion they reached that it's not authentic. Now, going back to my history, I was minding my own business, running my laboratory, doing my thing until July of 2000. When a strange artifact, I was approached to study a strange artifact called the Kensington runestone, something that I had never heard of before. I didn't know what it was. Frankly, I didn't care, because in my business, I can't become personally involved in the projects that we work on. And so I did a weathering study. I compared the weathering of tombstones of known age, the dates are right there, with the weathering of the runestone. And I concluded that the weathering was older than 200 years. And that was from the date it was pulled out of the ground, because it hasn't been in a weathering environment since. And that was 1898. So you go back 200 years from that standpoint, the claim of a late 19th century hoax is impossible. So what else do you have? There's only one thing left. It must be genuine. And that's what I wrote in my report. I published it, and I thought, well, good for them, they got one. And I was ready to move on and continue on with my life. But then the backlash came, and it was hard, it was brutal, and it was personal. And I just sort of went, wait a minute, people, let's take a time out here. I said, look, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. Point out where I screwed up in my report and I'll fix it. I didn't screw up in my report. They just didn't like the results. Well, tough hop. Sometimes life doesn't go your way. And it was confusing at first. And then it got personal. And then I got pissed. And so what I decided was I was going to try to get to the bottom of this. Why is it that these people, these academics that you would think would be thrilled to have this incredible artifact that I now know everything about? It's 24 years later, of course. But at the time, I'm like, what is it that bothers them so much? Why are they so adamantly against it? So what I decided to do was to dig deeper and look into the questions of who carved it, where did they come from, and why did they come here to North America, to the center of the continent, and place this long inscription carved in Scandinavian ruins? And so what I did was I trusted the rock. I trust rocks. I don't trust some people. And I knew that if the rock told me it was authentic, then everything in that inscription must be consistent with the 14th century because it's dated 1362. So starting in 2003 through 2005, I took 5 trips to Scandinavia, looking at the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating, and I found everything. And of course,
let me back up. Where's I don't know anything about the Kensington runestone.
Oh, okay, all right. Come on, come on.
Where was that?
Know it didn't instantly.
My background is biblical studies and ancient Hebrew manuscripts.
Okay,
where was the Kensington runestone found? And you're saying it's from the 14th century?
Well, it was found in central Minnesota by a Swedish immigrant farmer who was clearing trees in preparation for farming. And there it is. Yep. And it was pulled out of the ground. It was tightly wrapped in the roots of a tree. When they tipped the tree down, the stone was pulled out of the ground. And they've been trying to figure out what this thing is ever since. Now, I don't want to jump ahead and get into the details of right now.
Let's focus on the Hebrew stuff if we can.
Yeah. Well, the reason it's important is because it dovetails with the Hebrew history of North America, because the people that carved the Kensington runestone were the ideological and biological descendants of the Knights Templar. And so
the Knights Templar.
Yeah. And I'm not kidding. And just in the interest of full disclosure, I am a Freemason. I am also a Knights Templar. I'm a member of 3 different orders. Some are Masonic, some are not Masonic.
Is that what that ring is on your hand? Is that something to do with that? Yeah. What is that ring? I've never seen
that. Is just this is just a cheap ring of the one version of the Templar cross. We have different versions that appear at different times throughout history, and I'm not going to get into all those details.
Well, I know very little about the Freemasons or Knights Templar, and we probably don't want to go into that too much, but is part of their ideology, or one of those groups' ideology, that there was pre-Columbian contact with the New World? Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Now,
all right.
You are going, at some point, when you understand the depth of the research I've done, the books that I've published, and the books I'm going to publish about this subject matter, you are going to be all over it, my friend, as a Hebrew scholar.
So I want to identify this. So one of the criticisms against you is going to be, and this is completely an ad hominem attack.
Fire away, brother.
Oh, I'm not making it.
I know. I'm okay. It's okay.
Rather than attacking the evidence, you attack the person. I just did the 7+ hour interview with Dan Vogel, who is one of the great historians of early Mormon history. And he's accused by particularly Mormon apologists, not so much Mormon scholars, that, well, you just saying that because you're not a Mormon. Okay, well, and his point is, I looked at the evidence. I just want to know what happened, and this is what I found, right?
Yeah.
So the ad hominem attack, guys, look it up, is considered a logical fallacy. It's a way of not dealing with the evidence. So I just want to put that out there, because the attack is going to be, well, of course he says that he is a Freemason or a Knights Templar or whatever. Which one of those groups believes in the Columbian context? Is that both groups? Because I literally know
Well, first of all, let me
very
put this
little
into
about it.
context. I did not become a Freemason until November of 2015. I
Oh,
wasn't knighted in the first order that I was in until May of 2016. I joined the Freemasons. I became a Freemason. I was initiated into Templarism because of the research, because of what I found. That was, and so I did that because I wanted to learn more. I wanted to become initiated and understand, allegory, symbolism, and code, because that's what was turning up in the research, and I wanted to further understand it. And it was the best thing I could have ever done, because it added additional context to to a lot of the stuff that I already knew, and really opened doors to new avenues of knowledge and understanding that I didn't even know were there.
So this is a really important thing I want to emphasize, because what you just said is that you became a Freemason as a result of this research. Not, oh, I believe this because I'm a Freemason, let's go prove my pre-existing preconception.
Exactly.
And now, in the terms of the Book of Mormon, you're part of a secret combination. Am I right about that, Steve?
Well, let's put it this way.
Possibly.
I don't know how far we want to get into the
No, let's focus on the Hebrew
Mormon
stuff.
history.
Kensington runestone, the academics said it couldn't be real, and you're saying it is because of weathering. Can we pull up your PowerPoint that you sent us on, and maybe you can go through that?
In the Bat Creek?
Yeah, in Bat Creek, because Bat Creek's what I'm interested in.
Yeah,
You have
okay.
this
Well,
Paleo-Hebrew inscription that was found.
First off, let me share the screen. I'll hit that.
And maybe you'll say this, but I want to, from my perspective, say it. So there's a lot of Hebrew inscriptions that were found in America, but they're all pretty much surface finds, or they were, dug up by someone who wasn't an archaeologist. Bat Creek is the one that actually came from an archaeological excavation.
Correct.
So if it's not authentic, that's because it's an intentional hoax by somebody who was working for the Smithsonian Institute.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, if you go on my blog, this is going back to the time that we did this work, and I put out a blog after the episode. The Smithsonian, for the one and only time, actually went on my blog and made a statement about the Bat Creek stone and saying that it was a fake. And John Emmert, the guy that did the Smithsonian Institution agent that conducted the dig, was the one that perpetrated it. Now, this might be a little bit early to go into that, but I don't think people quite understand. So I'm not sure how you want to go through this, but
I'll turn it over to, actually, if you could click that little X where it says try it now, so we don't have to advertise for Adobe.
Let's see, where is it?
There's a little X there in the upper right, not the main X, but the second X go down a little bit and to your right. I believe it's your right. A little bit more down to your right where it says try it now.
You guys, I got to move you over here. You're covering things.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that X right there.
Yeah, click that. And is there a full screen button on this version of Adobe? Do you know about that?
Let's see.
This is fine. All right. So I'm going to turn this over to you, and you tell, because you've got here. Look, guys, this is really valuable. You could say this whole thing is a hoax and it's a fake, or whatever you want to say. But here we have the man who's, I think, making the strongest claim for authenticity, is willing to spend time with us and present his best evidence. So this is like, I've read a bunch of articles on this, and I could see from your PowerPoint, there's stuff that isn't in those articles. So in Judaism, we say there's the written law and the oral law. You're about to share the oral law with us.
Okay.
So I'm excited about it. I'm going to let you talk.
All right.
I'll probably jump in because I'm Israeli, and that's what we do. But go ahead.
Pardon me. I'll take you through this, and I'll try to keep it short. But
don't keep it short. Give us all the details. That's what
okay. All right. Well, you asked. You got it, brother. So when you look at this inscription, and before I get started, I want to ask you a question. Being a Hebrew scholar, is this Paleo-Hebrew? What is this text?
Obviously, it's Paleo-Hebrew.
Okay.
And now look. Now Mertz, I think it was Mertz, who said it was Phoenician.
Mertz, yeah.
The difference between Phoenician and Paleo-Hebrew, that's what, doctors call differential diagnosis, right?
Okay, all right.
Like in this case, you would have to say, according to Cyrus Gordon, who is the great scholar of Ugaritic, but that includes Semitic languages, What makes this Hebrew and not Phoenician is the mater lectionis, which is basically a letter that functions as a vowel, vav, in the inscription. Now, I'm not saying whether it's real or whether it's fake, but whether it's real Phoenician or real Hebrew, real fake Hebrew, it's clearly Paleo-Hebrew and not Phoenician based on the mater lectionis. So,
Okay.
and that's a pretty definitive argument, I think, that he brings. So yes, it's Paleo-Hebrew. Whether it's authentic Paleo-Hebrew, that's a separate question. But you know, and that
Well,
maybe is more, not maybe, that's more of that's an archaeological question.
yeah. Now we'll talk about the archaeology here in a second, but I just want to come out and state categorically, this is an ancient inscription. Exactly how old it is, we'll talk about that too, but this is not a fake, this is not modern, this is old. So you can take that for what you will. Okay, now, just to give you an idea, this is a drawing that was done by John Emmert in 1889 of the third mound number 3 of the Bat Creek complex that was found on the oh God, I can't remember the river name, but it was, I've been to the site. It's actually
It's
under
the Little Tennessee River, and I know
Little
that
Tennessee. That's right. That's right.
from reading other people's stuff. I've never been there.
Yeah, well, no, I have been there, and it's underwater now, but you can get pretty close to where it was. They backed up the Little Tennessee with a reservoir, and so this is now underwater. But this is what he found. There were 7 bodies that were aligned with the heads to, or let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 7 with their heads to the north. And then in the southwest quadrant, we had 2 more bodies, one with the head to the north, and the 9th body, or in this case, the first body with its heads to the south. Now, I have read some things in the past about the Essenic tradition. Are you familiar with the Essene? You must be.
I am, yes.
Okay. Is it true that their tradition is they bury their dead with the heads to the south?
That's a bit complicated because there are, I don't want to go too much into this, but there are cemeteries adjacent to Qumran, which is the main site we have that we attribute to the Essenes.
Yeah.
And it's not entirely certain which of those graves were from Bedouin in, like, I don't know, the 12th century, let's say, or maybe more recently, and which were by the Essenes. So it's a bit complicated. So
okay. In any case, that was something I remember hearing or read back in the day, but I wanted to ask you about that. So anyway, these are the bodies, and it was under the skull of the one with its head to the south that they found the sacred bundle that contained the Bat Creek artifacts. Now, this is an interesting quote from the report that I devoured in the Smithsonian Publications report that was published in 1894. But this is what he wrote in his field notes. In one or with 9, a large pair of copper bracelets and a polished stone with letters or characters cut on it, unlike anything I have ever seen. And I thought it was interesting that he used the word polished stone. And that is an interesting fact, that he interpreted the surface of the stone as having been polished, presumably after the inscription was carved. Now, there's something from a geological standpoint that's very important about this drawing. If you look in the lower right corner, right down here, you don't, let me see, where's my mouse? Right down here, this area?
Yep.
You don't see anything.
Right.
Now, this is a photograph that was taken and published in 1894, and Cyrus Thomas was in charge of the Bureau of Ethnology's reports. And you'll see that in that lower right quadrant, there is nothing there. Okay, that'll become important in a second. And here's Henrietta Mertz in her book, The Wine Dark Sea. You see that she has, her interpretation. When she flipped the stone around, she thought she saw some Phoenician characters. And then eventually it was brought to the attention of Cyrus Gordon, and he published in Argosy magazine that it was actually Paleo-Hebrew. Now, what I want to point out is now this is the stone after it's been turned 180 degrees, and you'll notice that that lower right quadrant that had nothing on there before, when it was found, when it was pulled out of the ground, has since, 2 scratches have been added to the stone. Now, we don't know when this happened, but it had to have happened when it was in the custody of the Smithsonian Institution. So I'm going to put that on them, okay? But somebody added these scratches sometime after the stone was found. Are you in agreement with that?
Yes.
It's not in the photo from 1894 or sometime between 1889 and 1894. So yeah, it seems to, and look, this happens, museums and libraries, damage happens. Yeah. So that's actually really important. By the way, guys, in my study of Hebrew manuscripts, this is huge because you may have a really bad grainy photo from the 1920s, and then you compare it to the manuscript today, and there might be, and I've seen this, where there's parts of the manuscript that are no longer there. and you think, oh, that's how it was preserved through the Middle Ages. No, that was lost in the last 100 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So that definitely happens.
My interpretation of these scratches is they were test scratches, maybe just to see, what would it take to carve an inscription like this? It's a relatively soft rock. It's an ironstone concretion. And one of the reasons I went to the site was to see if the local geology was consistent with this stone, because one of the questions that I often get from people when I look at artifacts like this, well, the stone that it was carved in, is it indigenous to the area? Did it come from the old world? Is it from the new world? And in this particular case, these ironstone concretions in the sedimentary rock are quite common in the area of the Little Tennessee River where mound number 3 was. So presumably this stone was from the local area, and it may or may not be important, but it's a conclusion that I drew. Okay.
Can you explain what, before you go on, go back to that picture, what is an ironstone concretion? I know very little about geology.
Well, basically it's a sedimentary rock that is comprised of essentially sandstone or mudstone that contains iron oxide in it, iron. And what happens is, as it weathers in the ground, it will form a crust or a rind, if you will, a coating around the surface of the stone. Now, when we look at later photographs, this will make more sense to you. I'm just telling you now, the geology of the stone is the first thing that we need to do anytime we look at any stones, right? Because then you can get some idea of how it's going to weather, what's going to happen to that rock over geological time.
And Scott, I just have a quick question. These other items that are in the photograph,
Yes, I was going to address those.
Okay, like the bracelets, and these were also found with it. Is that correct?
They were all found within the bundle. So by association, when you do carbon-14 dating on anything organic, which there is particles of wood, there's a bone all there that's between the 2 bracelets. Anytime you date something that is found together with something else, by association, whatever the age of that organic material is, the rest of the stuff is the same age. Does that make sense? Because it was all found together in the
it actually doesn't really make sense to me, but that's a bigger issue, right? In other words, this is something that they'll do in prehistoric sites in particular, right? They'll take like a stalagmite and they'll do some sort of radiometric dating on that, and they'll say, well, the bones that were found next to it were, I don't know, 100,000 years old.
No, that's different. That's a different context situation.
No,
what
for
we
sure.
have here is a burial that had a bundle that was placed under the skull, that was placed there at the time of the burial, unless you can prove there was intrusion and that it was added later, which John Emmert did not document. So I think we have to take it at face value that this bundle that contained all these artifacts were placed there at the time of burial. We have no reason to believe otherwise. So everything in that bundle was placed there at the same time. So
no, but carbon-14 tells you when the tree died, right? Or when the bone died. Right. And we don't have to go too much into this, but
no, you make a good point, because could it be that the artifacts that were found under that bundle are actually older than,
or they could be from different periods? Let's just, I'm not saying I believe this, but let's say there could be, the piece of wood could have been 500 years old from when the bones died, whatever it was, I don't know. And then maybe the stone was 1,000 years old when the person died. It was a relic from handed down father to son from his family, right? So you can't date the stone directly, not using carbon-14 because it doesn't have organic material. So you're making some assumptions there, right? But let's not get bogged down to that. I'll let
No,
you.
no, I no, you make a good point that there are other possibilities. However, there's an archaeological term that I've heard tossed about. The most parsimonious explanation is the likelihood, the most plausible explanation is that these things all came from roughly the same time, which would be close to the time of burial. Now, is it possible? Sure, it's possible these things could be much older, but unless you can provide factual evidence to support that argument, you really have to, I think, go with the most parsimonious or most likely explanation is that they were.
And parsimonious means something like cheap, like thrifty. Am I right about that?
I don't know who thrifty is. Who's that?
No, thrifty, like here I Googled it. It's excessively unwilling to spend. Parsimonious thrift is their example, right? Stingy is another word for. So in other words, the simplest explanation without introducing a whole bunch of different assumptions is that it's from the same date as the things found in the context of it. I know archaeologists say that, but it's a bit lazy, but okay.
Well, I happen to agree with that. Unless you have evidence to go somewhere else, you have to, I think you have to go with what you found. And it was in that burial mound. There was no evidence of intrusion. So it dates to that time period or older.
Maybe we have carbon-14 tests on the wood?
We'll get there. Yes. Okay. Yes, there was. Yep. Okay. Now, this was a guest I had on my show. That's Dr. Hugh McCullough, who was actually a professor of economics at Ohio State University. This was a picture we took while we were filming, but he was the one in the early, I believe it was the late 1970s, early 1980s. You'll have to look it up. I don't recall, but he was the one that initiated a testing program on the Bat Creek artifacts. And one of the things they did was they tested some of the wood that was found inside the bundle. And as I recall, I think they got a date of, yes, the polished, sorry about that barking is of a dog next door. So we'll just have to work with it until
we are dog people. I'm a dog person. I love dogs.
I love dogs too, but not when I'm trying to do a Zoom call. Right. But if you look at the top of this slide, you'll see that the C14 tested yielded dates between 32 AD and 769 AD. Regardless, it's old.
Wait a minute. Did each one have that range, or among them?
No, that was the test result. That was the range. Now this was done in the it looks like 1987. So
I'm pretty sure I'm not an expert in carbon-14, but my understanding is if you have a range, so what is that range? I'm bad at math, but that's
730 years.
What's that?
About 730 years. Yeah.
Right, but we have to look at for carbon-14, if I understand, and some carbon-14 person can correct me in the comments. But I believe if you have such a large range, that's basically saying it's inclusive and doesn't say anything. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Right. So in other words, it's about 1,300 years ago with a 700 year range. So 700 divided by 1,300 is a 50% margin of error. That basically means our something was wrong with our sample or our test.
No, it doesn't, because this was technology that dates to 1987. If we had those samples and tested them again today, I'm sure we would get a much tighter range. And I think that's work that needs to be done. In any case, I think we can reliably say that this is not a modern forgery, that this thing is at least 1,000 years old and probably much older.
Right, so you've got a carbon-14 test here. It has a 730 something year range.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, and then so anyway, again, by association, if the wood dates to that period, then all the other artifacts date to that period or older. So that would be the conclusion that I would draw. Now, the copper bracelets are also very interesting because they weren't copper. They were tested and they turned out to be brass. And if you look below, you can see the test data for the elemental composition of copper and zinc, which is what brass is primarily comprised of. And in this case, about little over 3% lead. But what's really interesting is if you look over on the far right, a first century Egyptian statue that was made out of brass has a very similar composition. So the suggestion is maybe this is old world brass works that was done here, presumably in the New World, or they were, brass bracelets that were brought over from the old world. You can speculate all you want, but the presumption for a long time was that they were copper. And it turns out they're not copper. They have been metalwork. So there was actually a forge that was used to create this alloy of brass. And that begs some very interesting questions. Where did that come from? Native Americans were not believed to have understand metallurgy. So could it have been somebody that came from the old world? I mean, all these things are pointing to an explanation that doesn't fit with what archaeologists are saying is Native American.
So it's really interesting because from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott, but my understanding is that they can't date like metals, but they can tell you their origin. Now, of course, there was copper mining going on in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that we know that was ancient.
Right.
Do you know if they've done any tests that they've been able to find out or could we go and retest them to see if we can go with the origin of where these metals were mined?
I think you can, yeah. What you're talking about is trace element analysis, that you can actually fingerprint the site, the origin, if you will, of where that particular metal came from. And yes, you can do that with Upper Peninsula, Lake Superior region copper. And I live in Minnesota. I went to school in Duluth in northern Minnesota. I actually worked as a field geologist after I graduated in northern Minnesota. So I understand the copper deposits very well, and they're very extensive. And so, yes, they do contain trace element signature that is unique to the location. So, yeah, you can source these things. And nowadays we can do it pretty reliably. So I would look, there's all kinds of testing that should be done on these artifacts. And getting the Smithsonian to cooperate is the issue, but we'll get to that question here in a little bit. Are we ready to move on from this?
No, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So what Stephen is describing would only work if it's in other words, if you took some kind of ore and you made it into a bracelet without adding lead or adding zinc, then that would work. But if you took a copper, and if you added, and they didn't have zinc isolated until the 17th century, but they had zinc that was naturally occurring in different ores. So if
this suggests otherwise.
That what?
Well, that copper was understood, or that zinc was understood, and that it appears
to. Are you saying the ancient Egyptians understood zinc?
Well, what I'm saying.
First century Egyptians.
Hold on. What I'm saying is this data suggests that people did understand how to work with copper and zinc to make brass.
Right, but you might have had some ore that you took from a mine in, let's say, first century Egypt, and you didn't know what the elements were because you didn't know that there were 92 naturally occurring elements. You knew that the ore from this particular mine had these properties, and the ore from a different mine had other properties, and maybe you were able to somehow refine it but you weren't isolating zinc, if I understand correctly, and you might have been isolating copper actually, but you didn't know that let's say the 69%, so 31% of the first century Egyptian statue, according to what you said here, is not copper. They didn't know what that 31% was. They knew though that there was this, they would call it we would call it a mineral, right? That had certain properties. And when you mix that with pure copper, you get, this result, right? So here's an important point. In the ancient world, there is no intentional brass. There's only bronze, which is where you took pure copper, and you'll correct me here. From my understanding is you took pure copper and you mixed it with pure tin. And if you ended up with brass, it was kind of by accident because they didn't know what zinc was. They knew what lead was for sure. So am I wrong about that?
Let's just say I strongly disagree. I think
Okay.
what we do is we make assumptions about what the ancients did and did not understand, and I think we'd be making a huge mistake to underestimate them.
So my assumptions in this case, 100%, I'm making assumptions, but it's based on what's written by Pliny the Elder, who died in the Vesuvius. He wrote a book called The Natural Histories, and Dioscorides, who was a sort of like a doctor in the first century. And they both talk about different ores and things like that in minerals, and they don't seem aware of zinc. They don't fully understand even the minerals they have, that actually they might have the same elemental composition, but they have different, they're called, I'm probably mispronouncing this word, cations or cations. In other words, you have minerals that end up with the same elemental composition, but maybe they have different acidity or different pH, or they have made under different conditions, so they end up having different properties. They knew about the properties, right? They didn't have a machine to determine what the what the elemental composition was, right?
Well,
So how did you determine it was 27.5% zinc, or whoever did that? How did they find that out? They used X-ray fluorescence or something, or maybe a synchrotron?
Like I said, this is the data that was presented by Hugh McCullough. He was the one that initiated this testing program, and these were the results. So I'm interpreting these results. And I mean, if we want to talk about what the ancients knew and didn't know, I'm sure they didn't call whatever that particular mineral was that was working for them to make this, what we now call brass. Maybe they called it something else. I'm sure.
Well, so in the Bible, for example, there's reference to yellow copper, which is probably what we call brass, because bronze has more of like a red hue. But
in any case, this is the data, and I think the point that's most important is that it was a surprise that this clearly indicates that these bracelets were manufactured using a metallurgical process and not just taking natural copper and pounding it into bracelets. And we have evidence that the same thing was taking place in the old world, in this case, in Egypt. So, I just find that very compelling. I mean, the data, if you look at these numbers, they're statistically, they're right on.
So I'm going to go ahead here and quote from an article by Mainford and Quass, who I know have been some of your, at least in the archaeological world, some of your critics, and you can respond and tell me why they're wrong.
Well, they, in my view, their work is terrible. They're basically, they were a hit job that was hired by the Smithsonian to try to put down any talk that these things are connected to ancient Hebrews and pre-Columbian contact. So I don't respect anything that they've done.
Okay. So just as they accuse you of being what was the term, cult archaeologist or something like this,
well,
you're accusing them of having.
Let's not talk about who I am. Let's talk about the data.
And I agree with that. But you're talking about
who names, and let's get after it.
So,
I mean, I don't want to hear
who they are.
BS,
So I'm going to quote what they said on page 767 of their article from 2004. And I don't know if this is correct or not. I'm asking you. So they said the brass bracelets appear to be of European origin, dating to the 18th or early 19th century. And I love that they quote their own previous article from 1991 as proof of that. which I would need
A little, what evidence do they have that it's 18th, 19th century?
Yeah, so I'd have to pull up the 1991 article.
They don't have any.
Well, what's
They
your
don't have
response?
it.
So they just have no evidence. They're just making that assertion.
Of course they are,
Okay.
because this thing can't be old, and they were hired guns, and it's just BS. It's not scientific, and frankly, to give it any oxygen is a waste of time.
No, but everyone's one Google click away from this. So we're going to present this, and someone's going to say, well, I mean, this was already disproven by Mainford and Quast.
No, it's not proven. Show us the evidence.
So you're saying it was asserted, not proven. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Let's.
And by the way, I've invited them to come on the program, and they haven't responded yet.
They won't.
Maybe they will after they see this. I'd love to hear their perspective.
Okay. So, in any case, what happened next was I made a plea to the Smithsonian Institution to have access to the Bat Creek stone, and they denied my request. So I thought, how else can I possibly get assistance to get this artifact? Well, the fact that it came out of what is now determined to be a Cherokee burial mound, I decided to approach the Eastern Band of Cherokee and their tribal council to make a formal request to get their help. And this is a picture of myself. On the far right is Leslie Kalin. Her maiden name is Rose, and standing between us is her father, Donald Rose, and another member of the tribal council on the left. I forget his name right now. I apologize for that. But this is at the tribal council. And I had talked to Leslie about how do I make a request to get help from, your tribe. And she said, I'll help you set it up, and you make a formal request, and we'll see what happens. So this was the day we did that. I made the formal request, and they chose to support me, and they wrote a letter, and they asked the Smithsonian to make the stone available. Now, the Smithsonian would not send the artifact to my lab, so I took my lab to them, and we went to the McClung Museum, and which is it's in Knoxville. It's at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. The McClung Museum is on campus there. And so here I am setting up my microscope. I shipped all this stuff out. I paid for it all. And I'm getting ready to examine the stone. You see, I've got the gloves on. I've got the stone. But I do have to tell you a quick story, because this was interesting. When I was getting set up, these are the archaeologists, and I think the head of the museum is standing in the middle. I can't remember his name now. But anyway, there were three representatives that came from the Eastern Band. And here they are, three women. Sharon Littlejohn on the left, Barbara Duncan, who's in the middle, who is an actual professional archaeologist. And then there's Leslie Kalin, who was representing Don Rose, who was then chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee at the time. So they're holding the Bat Creek stone. But if you look at this photograph, I had Leslie take this picture because these three clowns were standing on that side of the room. The women that were representing the tribe were on the other side of the room, and I was in the middle. And I remember I looked at these three people and I said, really, people, you're going to do this? I said, this is Barbara Duncan, this is Sharon, this is Leslie. Come over and introduce yourselves. I mean, they were just, the tension in the room was palpable. And I mean, this is the environment that we're dealing with. They did not want us there. The only
who were these people from? What group were they with?
This is with the museum, the McClung Museum.
Okay.
The director is in the middle.
Do you know their names?
I can't remember, but I could probably find them if I.
And you're saying they're archaeologists?
Yeah, they're archaeologists.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Look, can I put something out there? I want to let you talk, but so one of the reasons I think, and let's just put the cards on the table. One of the reasons I think a lot of mainstream archaeologists are so opposed to this has to do with what's called the mound builder myth, which I'm sure you're aware of. It was this idea that and here it's interesting that the Cherokee are here. So the mound builder myth was this idea in the 19th century that, the Native Americans, what they called Indians back then, they weren't sophisticated enough to make all of these mounds east of the Mississippi. So there must have been this white race that the Native Americans wiped out, and they were the ones who built the mound. And then you have all these artifacts pop up, seemingly confirm that there were Europeans before Columbus came over, let's say before the Vikings. And that was brought as confirmation of the mound builder myth. But by the end of the 19th century, the mound builder myth had been completely rejected. Some would say discredited, but it was rejected by mainstream archaeology. And so I think maybe there's like I wonder if, I'm thinking out loud here, I wonder if they're kind of protective of the Native Americans, thinking that there's like this racist undertone to the mound builder myth. And look, I'm not part of American archaeology. That's not where I come from. To me, I just like to know, were there right? Like, nobody has a problem, I think, saying that there were Polynesians who made it to Chile, right? No, I don't think I don't know if it's correct or not, but it wouldn't be a controversial thing. But saying that the Europeans who made it to the New World before, let's say the Vikings for sure, right? Because Columbus wasn't the first. We have the site in Newfoundland that I can't pronounce, something Meadows.
Meadows.
Yeah, exactly. The French name there, right? So there were people before Columbus, right? It was the Vikings and Vinland, whatever. But before that, right? So I think I wonder if they're defensive to say, well, no, the mounds were built by the ancestors of the Native Americans. We don't need to introduce Europeans to explain them. Do you think there's something to that?
I think the whole notion that, the indigenous people were not sophisticated enough to create these complex mounds that have, connection to the heavens and as above, so below, all that, that's nonsense. Of course, they had the ability and the knowledge and the cosmology. I mean, there's no question about it. In fact, if you just give me 1 second, I'm going to show you a brand new book that was just published that deals with this exact subject matter. Hold on.
This is great.
Well, and I'll just bring up for people Cahokia Mound. I'm from Illinois originally.
Oh yeah.
Cahokia is an astounding work of engineering.
Yeah.
And how do we know the Native Americans had the technology to do it? Because it's there.
Yeah.
So obviously they were able to do it, right? It's a bit of a circular argument. I'll admit that. But.
Yeah. No, and I think it's interesting because, okay, Scott. So share the book.
Yeah.
Okay. So this book was published by a very good friend of mine who is also indigenous. He's also a Freemason, a Rosicrucian, a Knights Templar. We've talked about all of this, but anyway, it's called Rediscovering Turtle Island.
Oh,
and it's written by Brother Taylor Keene, who is Cherokee and Omaha. And basically what he talks about in here is First People's account of the sacred geography of America and how, yes, the indigenous people constructed the mound. They were the mound building culture. And what's interesting is that he talks about how the mounds that we find in North America and indeed around the world actually reflect what's happening in the heavens. So when you go to one site, you see all this interconnectedness that's happening within the mounds and structures that were constructed there, but they are just one part of a much bigger puzzle or matrix, if you will, that is on Earth, that they're all connected across the continents. And it's really an interesting take. And let me tell you, this guy is one sharp dude. He's a very, he's an academic, he's a PhD, and he's a really good guy. So this just came out here in the last month. And I was asked to write a blurb in here, and I did that. So
okay, well, on my website, nehemiaswall.com, we'll post a link to that where people can find the book.
Yeah, we'll have a link.
Rediscovering Turtle Island.
Okay. Beautiful. So here you are back in, is this 2010 from your report,
yep.
I believe?
So anyway, let's keep going.
What's that piece of equipment there?
That's just an optical reflected light microscope. We have magnifications up to about, I'd say 150x, but we're looking at the artifact. We don't need to go into that high of magnification for the observations that I was making at that particular point. And just to give you some idea, guys, when we do these analyses, We start by looking at the large scale features of these objects and we work small. In other words, we start at low magnification. We document, the dimensions, the weight, the physical features that are present on the stone, and then we start to work small. And eventually we will get to the scanning electron microscopy, where we can identify things elementally, and we can also go up to magnifications as high as 1,000,000x if we want. But that was not necessary in this particular case.
So the 1500x, I'm looking at your report that I was able to download online. And by the way, can we have permission to repost this report?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll post it because it was hard to find. It was archived by someone else. It wasn't. I couldn't find it on your website. I hope it's actually yours.
I'm sure it is.
It's Walter and Staley, and it's from 2010.
Staley, yep.
Okay. So you have
Dick is no longer with us. He died.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
about
that.
10 years ago. But
so you have on figure 13, 1500x. What was that done with? Is that the electron microscope?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure it was. Yep.
Okay. And
so
then,
we'll get to
if
that.
you're going to 100 up to 150 is the optical microscope
On this particular one,
right.
and it also has a camera on the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I was looking at, you could see on the monitor to my right, that black laptop there, behind that light, you can see it to the right.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody could see what I was looking at in real time.
Okay.
It was live. Okay.
Beautiful. All right.
Okay, there are the ladies. Now, these are just, like I said, we start by looking at the large scale features and we work small. Now, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, you can see Cyrus Thomas was the one that presumably wrote this information on the back of the stone, and J.W. Emmert was the field agent that conducted the dig. Now, if you look at the back of the stone, there's some interesting things I want to point out. Do you see how it's a lighter color than the darker side where the inscription is? Mm-hmm. And if you look along the edges, you can see the darker areas. What's happened is that that darker rind, kind of like when you peel back, the rind on an orange, has peeled off of the back side. We see one little island of that material that's still intact in the lower right. Okay. Corner of the artifact. That's a little recess, and so it didn't peel off.
You're talking about this thing here?
Correct.
Okay.
And you can see the remnants on the top side, even little bits on the other side, but on the bottom side, but on the opposite side where the inscription is, that dark layer is still intact. Okay. Yeah. Now, I want you to look at directly above that little island that we talked about. Do you see that scratch there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in the report, John Emmert talked about taking a probe, and he was probing the mound, and he hit the stone. That's how he found it. And I think that's the impact where John Emmert hit the backside with a metal prod. That's my interpretation.
Okay.
And it's a fresh scratch. Okay. Now,
well,
I don't
let
know.
me ask you a geology question, because I don't know anything about geology. So what's your explanation of why the rind is on the other side and only a little bit here, but mostly this is rind free? What is I read that in your report. I don't know that I understood it.
Yeah, well, we don't know exactly why, but there were at some point in this rock's history, probably after it came out of the ground, maybe it weathered out and it was found laying on the ground, but there were some conditions, water, freezing, who knows, that caused this side to fall off and the other side didn't, and we'll just never know. But it was likely. I mean, it could have maybe it was done by the person that found the stone. I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of tool marks. I think it was a natural process, but we just don't know it.
And you don't mean Emmert, you mean the ancient Native American who found it on the ground and wrote the inscription.
Right. Yeah, whoever it was that inscribed the inscription.
So in other words, they picked up a stone off the ground and already had that rind removed on the back.
More than likely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to clarify too, we don't have any pictures of the back side of this from the 1890s, Scott?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at I don't think so. I think the only one that we have in the Smithsonian reports, and you can look this up, it's volume, I forget what the volume number is, but it was published in 1894.
Okay.
Yeah, and guys, you can actually download it. It's really cool. I downloaded it. You can find these online, the Smithsonian reports.
Oh, okay.
It's volume 12
Okay.
of the
That
Smithsonian,
sounds right.
and you can see it for yourself. And they have there that black and white photo that you referenced.
Yeah. I don't know if they have one on the backside though.
Right. No, well, and it's on page 394, figure 273. And
Okay.
that's only the front side.
Are there
And
any others of the backside? I don't remember.
not in this volume.
Okay.
So, and what you did actually, I want to give you credit here because, the mainstream archaeologists are, saying you didn't do serious work, but you actually went and found the field notes at the Smithsonian. That's actually, I think, very commendable, right? In other words, when it was published in 1894, that was the result of taking a bunch of raw data and putting it into what can we actually put in the printed form, right? Can't put everything. So you found the actual field notes written by
Yes.
Emmert, am I right? So
Well, I've read the report. I have a copy, an original copy of the 1894 volume. In fact, I have all the volumes. I bought a whole set of the Smithsonian report.
No, but the field report was the handwritten report
No,
from
these are the
February
field notes.
1889.
Yeah, the field notes from 1889 when he
Right.
did the actual dig.
That's really important. If we're saying this is a fake and we're just basing it on what was published in 1894, well, we can go back before 1894 and see, okay, what were they saying in February of 1899 when it was first discovered, right? That might have changed over those 5 years. I think that's important original research that you did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to know everything I could about the dig itself, what he found, what his observations were, to see if they were consistent with what I was seeing. And as it turns out, some of the things were not. Things were different. And
like those two lines on the front.
Like those two scratches, exactly. So I wanted to go back and look, I was doing work for the Cherokee. This is serious work. And I take all my work very seriously. And for people to accuse me of somehow being a schlocky dude, I was assigned to the Pentagon after 9/11. And I was tasked with overseeing the examination of 750 samples of concrete, of fire-damaged concrete from the jet fuel fire after the plane hit the building. And, a lot of times we find ourselves in our business going out, talking to engineering firms, trying to get work in. I had been in business long enough and apparently had a reputation that was good enough that the federal government sought me out to work on, what was the worst terrorist attack in the history of our country. So I like to think that they hired me because I knew somewhat what I was doing. And for people out there to make a claim that I don't know what I'm doing, show me the evidence.
I think their claim is that, well, I don't know what their claim is, but I can give you my impression is that when it comes to archaeology, or and this is meant as an insult, not by me, right? But but they would say that you're an autodidact, that you taught yourself, and that you weren't formally trained in their institutions in archaeology. And look, there are things. Let's just be honest here. If you were to go through the University of Tennessee and get like that place there, and you were to get a degree in archaeology, you would be told, and this is kind of oral law stuff, you would be told, there's a bunch of people who publish those things, don't pay attention to them because they're wrong. And you would internalize that, and you would come out and say, these are the things that we consider legitimate, these are the things we consider not legitimate. And you didn't have that indoctrination. And so
that's the key. That's the word right there. That's the word, indoctrination.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, this is funny. So here we are. We're talking about archaeology, right?
Mm-hmm.
They dig things up out of the ground, right? The ground is made up of weathered rock. Remember, I'm a geologist, right? Mm-hmm. They examine pottery, right? Pottery is fired clay. Clay is a rock, if you will, right? They study lithic artifacts. They study metallic artifacts like copper artifacts. Last I checked, they are rocks, okay? I'm a geologist. I know a little something about rocks, and I don't want to get into this game where I'm just as qualified as they are and everything else. Look, there are a lot of things about archaeology that I don't know, but I certainly understand the basic premise of archaeology and, you know, the various techniques and things that they do. It's not rocket science, okay? We're talking about a soft science discipline, okay? Let's be honest. It's a humanities discipline. And for them to make the accusation that I don't understand scientific method or that I'm not capable of understanding what they do, that's just BS, okay? And in fact, what I would love to see, because it's this thing called collaboration. Because I guarantee you, if I was working with an archaeologist, there are some things that they deal with that I might be able to help them with. And there's absolutely some wonderful archaeologists out there that I have worked with that have helped me understand the archaeological aspects of certain things that I've looked at. I wrote a book, a 574-page book called The Kensington Runestone: Compelling New Evidence, with a linguist, with the runologist, Dr. Richard Nielsen. And it was the collaboration of our two disciplines that made all the difference in really authenticating the Kensington Runestone. I could give you numerous examples of where our collaboration led to breakthroughs that were absolutely profound, that helped us with our overall analysis. And what I really find disappointing is these archaeologists that feel that they need to attack me for somehow treading in their sacred ground of archaeology. I mean, this is not difficult.
Well, sacred ground literally and figuratively, right? Meaning this was, you didn't tread there, but this was a Native American sacred, you know, I once heard this described as, well, how would you feel if somebody dug your grandmother up? And you didn't do that, right? Somebody else did it, right? But
but you get my point, right?
No, for sure. I definitely hear what you're saying. So maybe this could be an invitation to any archaeologists out there who are watching this to contact Scott Wolter and do some interdisciplinary work with him. And maybe he'll come to the opposite conclusion if you can explain to him why he's wrong. Would you be open to that?
Of course I would be open to that. But, you know, I have, and I'll tell you this right now. When it comes to the Kensington Runestone, I'm going to just give you a quick little diatribe here of something that may or may not.
Why don't you exit out of the screen share while you said you're going to do diatribe. So let's just go to full screen so it's a little enhances the viewer's experience.
All right, we're gonna. Oh, geez, I don't know if we want that, do we?
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. I don't like to stay on something for too long.
Especially if someone's watching on the phone. There's like a little tiny Scott they're seeing and a giant slide.
Let's see. I'm trying to figure out how to get me big here.
I'll just exit screen share.
Do stop share. That's the trick.
Stop share. Yeah.
Okay, stop share. There we go.
Okay,
there we go. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I've always been respectful. I mean, I've always liked the mavericks, people who think outside of the box, people who look at, don't follow the institutions, but kind of do their own thing. So that's why I've always kind of enjoyed the work that you do, Scott. So why don't you just maybe to just explain to the audience where what you want to tell them.
Well, when I first did the runestone, which brought me into this world, and I will, like I said, there are some wonderful archaeologists that I've worked with in the past that saw the value of the work that we do in our laboratory, the forensic work that we've done on many of these artifacts, and so I just. When it came to the Kensington Runestone, think about it like this. In this 574-page book, we went down every rabbit hole. We looked at every question, every argument, every complaint. We looked at everything. And in the end, we were able to document voluminous quantity of facts in multiple disciplines, which include geology, late 19th century history, 14th century history, because the stone is dated 1362. We documented the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating, the history behind Olaf Ullman and his family, the discoverer, and of course the history of the Templars who carved it and left it as a land claim. All this voluminous evidence in multiple disciplines is consistent, cohesive, and conclusive that this is a 14th century artifact. It is authentic. There is no question about it. So that being true, how can there possibly be factual evidence to support the contrary? It can't exist, and it doesn't exist, because when you look at all of the arguments against the Kensington runestone, they don't stand up to scrutiny for 1 second. And how could they? Because there are no facts. There cannot be facts to support a conclusion that's not valid. That's one of the dirty little secrets of our forensic geology, of material forensics that we do. And so I challenge anyone out there, any archaeologist, bring it, okay? You want to have a one-on-one debate with me about the Kensington runestone, about the Bat Creek stone, about the Tucson lead artifacts, which, by the way, if you haven't looked at them, you'd better. As a Hebrew scholar, you're going to love them.
I'm not familiar with those. I've
You're
seen
not?
the Lost Luna. No, I've seen the Lost Lunas inscription twice. Once before it was defaced.
No.
But I'm not familiar with the Tucson material.
Oh my God, dude, you got to look at them. Besides the Kensington runestone, I would say the Tucson lead artifacts are the most compelling out of place artifacts I've ever seen. 32 artifacts that were found buried outside.
So let's do a follow-up
Tucson.
on that after I've done some research, because I literally never heard of them until just now.
You're going to go crazy. Tucson lead artifacts, look them up.
There's lead as in the material, LEAD?
LEAD, yeah,
okay.
they're made of lead, yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
And
Yeah,
I've done some scientific testing on them, and I
Mhm.
did a pretty good job on those too. I might, if I do say so myself.
So Scott, I wrote, so in preparation for this, because this isn't my field, right? I'm an expert at, like I said, in Hebrew manuscripts and Hebrew philology.
Yep.
So I like I haven't even heard of the Tucson material, right? The Tucson lead. Here's what I did. I went to Google Scholar, and I typed in archaeopetrography, which is that the term that you're described as the founder?
I came up with that term, archaeopetrography.
So I wrote that into Google Scholar to see, okay, what's been published in archaeopetrography? It says online that Scott's the founder of that, and I couldn't find anything. What I did find is an archaeologist who deals with petrography. And I wrote to her and I said, do you know about this method? And can you, refer me to anything on it? And here's what she wrote. And I'm not going to name her name because I didn't get her permission, but I want you to comment on it. I am unfamiliar with Dr. Wolter's method, as I specialize in traditional petrography, which doesn't date artifacts, but rather provides the analyst with the object's mineral composition and geologic and/or anthropogenic development. I have not read anything about his method or the artifact, meaning Bat Creek, unfortunately, until reading your email. Okay, and this was like a couple weeks ago. So, and look, to be fair, she says she doesn't know about it, right? So maybe there are people who do know about it.
Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor, okay? I don't have a PhD, so let's get that on the table. I am a professional. Okay. I am not an academic.
And there are academics who don't have doctorates. Dan Vogel is at the head of his profession, and he only has a bachelor's degree, right? In humanity, right? It's a humanities field. I want to defend humanities there for a second, because you were pushing on the humanities, and there's some fair criticism maybe, but I think so. There are humanities that are serious, that is serious scholarship.
They're all wonderful disciplines. That's not my point.
And there are people in humanities who are pseudo scholars. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
And some of them are professors and some are published scholars, right? Or published in any event, right? Within humanities, there are especially certain fields that are pseudo, in my view. But really, they're unfalsifiable, right? They can't disprove them. And it's true, there are hard sciences like that you're part of, but then hard sciences without the humanities element, they don't have the full picture. And I do a lot of interdisciplinary work, and I deal with brilliant physicists and chemists and people who deal with archaeometry, really brilliant people. But without the humanities side of it, they're missing, and they'll tell you, we have these powerful tools, we don't know where to point them unless you tell us. Now, you won't know what the results mean unless we tell you. There's this important synergy.
Hence collaboration, right?
For sure. So I think it would be wonderful if somebody could, if there was a collaboration like that in this field, and maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of it because it's not, I'm not an expert in American archaeology. But yeah, I mean, look, so their starting assumption is these things are fake unless you can prove otherwise, right? Let's just be honest. They openly say that, right? And it sounds like you're saying, look, I've been convinced that they're authentic. You need to prove that they're fake, right? Is that fair to say?
Well, I think their starting premise is wrong. You don't start with a conclusion. You start with a blank slate. You don't have an opinion because you have no basis for an opinion other than your indoctrination, right? So the premise from the very beginning is flawed. And my experience in dealing with these people for 24 years now is they seem to have an inability to say three little words. I don't know. It's okay to say that. And if you don't know, you don't draw an opinion. You don't just defer to, well, it's probably fake, so I'm going to start with that. You prove to me that it's authentic. No, that's not a scientific approach. There should be a blank slate. You have an unknown here, right? And so you do the analysis to try to figure out if there's something there or if there's something not. And I will tell you this, in my experience with dealing with these out of place artifacts, I have found plenty of fakes. And
tell us about the most interesting fake. I'd like to hear that. By the way, how are we on time? Because I have some questions about your report, and I don't want to run out of time. How are we?
Well, I'm not sure how much time I have because we are taking Haley's sister out to a brewery here.
So we'll save it for a different.
I got to get ready for that before.
Let's save for a different conversation about the fakes. I have some specific questions about your report.
Well, we should probably go back to the PDF because we're getting into that right now.
Okay, so go ahead. Let's do that, and we'll save. And I hope we have a follow-up conversation. This has been fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, we can do this anytime you want, man. This is fun. I'm enjoying this. And when I get fired up, don't take it personally. It's like I have old memories that are coming back here. Now I'm looking.
I have thick skin. I have to in my field.
Same here. Oh my goodness, I get attacked all the time, my friend. So I'm simpatico.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing that people feel they have to attack to try to win their arguments. I'm trying to. Where's the file now? I
once spoke to a professor at Tel Aviv University, and somebody had written something unkind about me. He said, "Look, this is academia. You fight it out and leave as much blood on the ground as possible." I'm like, wow, that's really sad. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, no, it's it doesn't need to be like that. But you have to understand something. I went to school on a football scholarship, and I was a linebacker. And if you want to go, let's go. The linebacker in me will never die. And so when people challenge me or attack me, bring it. And that's what inspired
So this is the
me.
metal prod. This is modern, according to your interpretation of it.
Yep. Now let's go back here. Where the hell am I now? I'm hold on here.
So here we have the Paleo-Hebrew letter Vav.
Okay, now this is a close-up, and this is actually a scanning electron. No, this is reflected light here. This picture is of the two scratches. Okay. Now the yellow boxed area is blown up on the right, and you can see where we have clay that is, we busted through that brown rind that peeled off on the backside, and we are now into the center of the stone, which is clay in composition. It's an iron-rich clay, and you can see the little step fractures, and we can actually see the direction of the probe went from the bottom to the top. You follow me?
So what we're seeing here is two scratches on the front, and you call those numbers 11 and 12 in your report for people who want to check this.
Yeah.
And these were made sometime between 1894 and 1971. They're not in the 1894 photo, but they are in the 1971 photo. Okay.
Correct.
This is what a
Correct.
modern scratch looks like. That's your point here, I think, right?
Yep. And we can even tell the direction of the scratch in this particular case was from bottom to top. Okay. Now, this is also an unweathered scratch, because unless somebody at the Smithsonian put this thing outside for a while or buried it in the ground, I'm going to make the assumption that this thing has never been in a weathering environment from the time that scratch was made until I took these pictures. Are we okay with that?
I mean, that could be correct. What is the orange-rich clay here? You talk about the
Iron-rich
about that
clay.
in your report.
Yeah,
What's that?
that's the iron-rich clay. That's the center of the stone.
Or you say iron-rich,
Rich.
orange-colored clay. Where's the orange? I don't.
Well, to me, that looks orange, those colors, kind of yellowish orange.
So, and then one of the points you'll make later, is that this modern scratch after 1894 has the orange clay in it, but the original scratches of the Hebrew inscription doesn't. Is that right?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think here's another presumption. When the original inscription was carved, what we're calling Paleo-Hebrew for this discussion, but you're the expert. If it's something else, you can let us know. But for now, let's just refer to it as a Paleo-Hebrew inscription. When that was carved, we're making the assumption that it would have looked something similar to this. There would have been clay that was in the groove like this, that had those step fractures, and it would have looked a lot like this. I mean,
so guys, pay attention. That's a very important statement, that this is an assumption, and this is one of the key points of your argument, if I understand correctly.
Yep.
That this is what a modern scratch looks like, and the characters, let's call them that. The Hebrew inscription, what I call Paleo-Hebrew, that doesn't have this orange clay in it. Okay.
Well, let's before we go there, let's agree that when that inscription was done, the day it was done, according to the C14, at some point in the historical past, those grooves, after they were carved, just like these scratches, would have had that clay and the step fractures that we see.
So I will say that I have no reason to think that. That is your assumption. You do state that this was made with a different tool than the other ones, that this tool was more pointy than the letters, which were made with a more rounded tool. So maybe that type of tool leaves different residue. I have no idea. I don't know.
No,
but I think it's important to identify what the assumptions are.
In my opinion, the answer is no. It would have looked similar to this. It would have that.
But this is the crux of the argument, I think, right? This is what I wanted to see for Mainford and Quass, and maybe they wrote it and I didn't see it, right? But this should have been what they were arguing. Well, Volter and Staley make this assumption, and here's why that assumption is wrong. Now, I'm not a geologist. I have no idea if the assumption is right or wrong. I have no reason to think.
Good luck with that argument.
Okay. All right. And
this is something. Remember something. My work has been peer reviewed by other geologists and by Dick Staley. So he was one of the top material scientists in the world at the time. So any archaeologist that's going to make that claim is going to have to provide evidence.
Okay, I got to challenge you on that. I hate to do this, but you say it's been peer reviewed. Was it published in a peer-reviewed publication?
Well, okay. Now what you're doing is you're framing the argument.
No, I'm asking a question.
You're asking a question. The answer is no.
Okay.
But you have to understand we do things different in the professional field.
Okay, so peer review means different things to different people. There was a really interesting thing recently by Eric Weinstein about how peer review is kind of a modern term. Let's not get into that. Yeah. Guys, look that up.
But let me make this point. Mm-hmm. When we do our peer review in the professional material science world, we have to be prepared to testify in a court of law to our findings under oath. And that is an extremely high bar, especially when you're dealing with absolute prick attorneys that are doing anything and everything they can to undermine your findings. So it is an extremely high bar, in my opinion. Okay. And I would argue probably a higher bar than the opinion truth by consensus that we see in.
And the reality is there's no peer-reviewed journal that would publish this. We know that. So let's move on. Let's not get bogged down in that. Right? They wouldn't publish it because they probably wouldn't even send it for peer review. They would say, we know that this is pseudoscience, so we're not going to waste our time. That's what they would probably say.
And I wouldn't even dignify that statement with a response.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's probably.
I know, but I'm saying anybody that would say something like that to me is ignorant and wouldn't be worthy of taking the time to even try to explain it. I mean, it's just.
So let's move on here because we're running out of time, and this is important. We got the orange clay there.
Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm looking at these modern scratches. The grooves of these modern scratches using scanning electron microscopy. And you can see those clay areas with the step fractures, and we're looking at them closer. You can see that material is in the bottom of that groove, right?
Yes. I mean,
now we're looking at one of the characters of the inscription that is older, came out of the burial mound. Now, if we take a close look, you can see that we see vertical scratches, parallel scratches that are consistent with the polishing that was mentioned by Emmert. You see him?
Guys, those looking at the report, this is character number 6, which is the lamed in the inscription.
Okay. And you see those parallel scratches, correct, on the surface?
Yeah.
Okay, and my conclusion is that's consistent with Emmert's statement that he saw a polished stone. So this wasn't polished after it was pulled out of the ground. This is, this is consistent with the state of the artifact when it was pulled out of the ground.
Wait, I didn't follow that. How do we know that?
What I'm saying is Emmert in his field notes said. And I made a comment in this in the early part of the presentation that he called it a polished stone.
Right.
These scratches on the surface of the stone next to the carved lamed, you called it, are consistent with his statement. So what that leads me to believe is that nobody has polished. This wasn't polished after it was found. It was already polished when it was pulled out of the ground based on Emmert's observation and these photos.
So here again is another crux of the argument. If Emmert is the one who made it or somebody on his behalf and polished it, he would know that it was polished and he would say that, or he could say that, right? Meaning, what's your response to that? How do we know Emmert didn't polish this or somebody on his behalf?
Well, I think, you get to the point where things are getting ridiculous, right?
Really?
Don't you want to give this field agent the benefit of the doubt unless you have reason to question him?
No. Well, so here's the reason to question him. And I'm going to quote now Mainford and Quast bring this, and you can disagree with it. But there's a statement from Cyrus Thomas. And Cyrus Thomas was, of course, the boss of Emmert. And he makes this, it's in a book called Introduction to the Study of North American Archaeology, published in 1898. And he warns people about how there's a whole bunch of fakes out there and you can't trust them. And he mentions specifically Hebrew.
That's, I'm sorry, but that's rumor. There is no factual evidence to support that statement. It's just rumor, and it's designed to create doubt, and it has no place in the scientific discussion.
Wait, doesn't Thomas say that, though? Are you saying it's not true he says that?
No, I'm sure he did say that. I'm sure a lot of people did. But unless you have evidence to support the statement.
So it's on page 24 of his book. He says another fact, this is Cyrus Thomas writing in 1898. Another fact which should be borne in mind by the student is the danger of basing conclusions on abnormal objects. Do we agree this is an abnormal object? Maybe not. Okay.
This is the thing.
I'm not the one to ask.
Okay, he says, or on one or two unusual types. And then he says, I'll jump ahead a little bit. He says, stones bearing inscriptions in Hebrew or other world characters have at last been banished from the list of prehistoric relics.
Right. But you know what, Doc, I want to say in defense of this, he did not know at the time that was a Hebrew inscription.
Right.
And that's an assumption, and it's an erroneous statement he had no business making, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, but I'm just saying that doesn't, even if he's saying that, he's not Like, because he did not know that we would later find that's a Hebrew inscription. So to me, that's not
right.
condemnation.
That's right.
And he would
So
not
he should
necessarily.
never have made the statement because he was making an assumption that turned out not to be valid. It's an erroneous statement he should never have made.
But also he thought this was Cherokee, so it would not have been abnormal in his mind because he would have thought it was something that was
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
no, but if it's Paleo-Cherokee, am I right that it's the only Paleo-Cherokee inscription?
Well,
There is no, they didn't have a written language, so no, there is no Paleo.
Right.
There is no.
No, but he thought it was
Paleo-Hebrew or
Paleo-Cherokee, so that
Cherokee
his statement would apply to the stone because it's the only supposedly Paleo-Cherokee inscription in existence. And he says if you have an unusual thing of one or two, you can't base conclusions on that, right? And I agree, he doesn't mention this specifically, but it sounds like he's alluding to this. I don't know. All right, I'll let you continue because
Yeah. In any case, it's a statement he shouldn't have made.
that might be.
In my view,
might be.
It's irrelevant and it creates bias and
no, but you said shouldn't we give Emmert?
Now.
You said shouldn't we give Emmert the benefit of the doubt? And I'm saying, based on his boss, no, we shouldn't, right? Meaning, it could be a wrong statement he made, but the statement that he made in 1898 is that if you have some unique artifacts, you should ignore them because we keep digging in mounds and not finding this kind of thing. And the fact that you found a couple, supposedly, you shouldn't base conclusions on that. That's the introduction to North American archaeology.
I understand, but it's frankly, it's a stupid statement. It doesn't make any sense.
Might be. I
don't have a lot of patience for some of these early statements that just have no basis in fact. It's just.
Okay. But frankly, in any event, so one of your main contentions is we should trust Thomas, and obviously scholars are saying no, we shouldn't. Meaning your opponents are saying no, we shouldn't.
No, I'm not saying anything. I'm saying, look at the data and look at each artifact on a case-by-case basis. You don't make assumptions about a group of artifacts or.
Okay, but so you're saying this is polished, and my question was, how do we know it wasn't polished by Thomas? And I think your response is because Thomas told us it wasn't.
No, Emmert.
Oh, or Emmert, sorry, Emmert.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that he made a comment that most people wouldn't have caught, I don't think, that he called it a polished stone. Mm-hmm. And when I first looked at the artifact, holding it in my hand, I didn't notice that indeed it was polished until I saw these scratches, and then it reminded me of what he said. So, the polish was there when he found it and not something that was added later. And I just found it consistent with his statement. That's all.
Right. So it was found in 1889. So the polish in February
was there when he found it.
Right. And so maybe he did it he found it February 15th, I believe, or thereabouts, 1889. Maybe it was done on January 31st. I don't know. And now if you have different evidence.
You have. You can sit there and ask questions all you want, but you also have
That's my job to ask questions.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes it gets to the point of being silly. Take the guy at face value. Now we'll talk about him at the end, okay? About who John Emmert was and what happened there. Okay, so let's keep going. So now what we're doing is we're taking a closer look at the inscription, and what we don't see in any of the carved lines that are part of the Paleo-Hebrew inscription is any of that silt. Mm-hmm. It's gone. That would have presumably been there when it was carved, because the fresh scratches tell us what a freshly carved character looks like, and it's got silt and sediment at the bottom of the grooves, and we don't see it in any of these grooves of the Paleo-Hebrew inscription. Wait, why is this jumping ahead? I'm sorry. This is really pissing me off. Okay, so now, based on that, and there's some more slides here that are not showing up because I made a PDF, but in the end, I concluded that because there's no evidence of intrusion, there's no evidence this was made at the time it was found, all the physical evidence that we see geologically on the stone is consistent with this thing having been pulled out of the ground in the state it was in. The only way for those grooves to be clean and devoid of that clay is if it was weathered in a wet burial mound for a extensive period of time. How long that took, I don't know, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take many years. And based on the C14 testing, we're pushing it back over, 1,300 years, almost 2,000 years. And could that be consistent with the weathering we see on the stone? Based on what we know about its discovery, the answer is yes. So and I felt that was enough evidence to draw the conclusion that it was genuine.
So here's one of my big questions that I want to ask you from the very beginning.
Okay, well, why don't we exit out? Let's exit out of the.
Oh wait, no, I don't want to do that yet.
Oh, okay.
Let me. How about this? Let me finish the presentation.
Yeah, and then let's do that. Yep.
So after that, when I actually I wrote that report. You'll see it was to the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and when I presented the report, they got pissed off, and they said we want that stone back. And so I went to the tribal council. I was there. They passed a resolution demanding the Smithsonian Institution return the Bat Creek stone and all the artifacts with it. That is why you saw the stone at the Eastern Band of Cherokee Museum inside, that glass box.
And that was in December 2014. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, and to my knowledge, it's still there. I don't think the Cherokee told me they're not giving it back. It came out of one of their burial mounds. It's a funerary object, and it's not leaving. And I don't blame them. Screw the Smithsonian. They don't deserve it. And by the way, that vote was passed unanimously. There were 12 members of the tribal council. And so the stone came back. Now, this is an interesting slide that I have in here that just shows how ridiculous and idiotic some of these academics can be. And this is Gerald Schroedel, who did an interview on August 3rd. And he accused proponents who are saying that this artifact is in fact an authentic artifact of being racist. And the reason he calls people like me racist, and I've been called racist many times, and what I find ironic is that I have a very, very close relationship with many indigenous people, with multiple tribes, and they have backed me up in my research on the Kensington runestone and the Knights Templar being in North America 400 years before Christ, but that's another discussion. But they call me racist because I have the audacity to claim that these so-called out-of-place artifacts could not have been created by indigenous people. Well, good luck with the argument that the Kensington runestone, which is written in Old Swedish, is a Native American artifact, or the Bat Creek stone, or the Tucson lead artifacts, or the Spirit Pond runestones. There's a whole host of these artifacts that were not created by the natives. I've asked the natives. They said, are you kidding me? We don't do this stuff. But yet I'm a racist because I make the claim that there were Europeans that carved these and not indigenous people. Then he went on to say that Emmert could have pulled the stone from his pocket. Well, the geological evidence I just presented to you shows that that's impossible. And then he talks about the bones and the wood artifacts could have been placed there 2,000-year-old bones in a grave. Are you kidding me, Gerald? I mean, this isn't even anything to be taken seriously, but these are the kind of claims these people make just to hang on to that sacred paradigm. That it's just, to me, it's ridiculous. But in any case, so Leslie was the one who took offense to the Smithsonian Institution blaming John Emmert for placing this artifact, just like Gerald Schroedel just did. So what we did is we took a trip to the East Hill Cemetery in Bristol, Tennessee, where we found that John Emmert's name is listed on this monument in the park, but his grave is not marked. He's buried in an unmarked grave. And what we also learned was that John Emmert not only served in the Civil War for the Confederates, he also was a member of law enforcement. He was also a Freemason. And I can tell you that the Smithsonian's official position was that John Emmert is the one that created this fake. And they went on my blog site and they wrote something to that effect. I don't remember exactly what their wording was, but what I did was I shot back to the Smithsonian and I said, well, you know what, guys, you got a real problem here because this is your field agent who conducted this dig, and you are making the claim that he created and placed a fake artifact into this dig, which calls into question everything about the Bat Creek dig, right? Right?
For sure.
Okay. Well,
and actually anything that Emmert excavated, not just Bat Creek.
Did you know that he conducted over 200 digs?
And according to Mangford,
so now you're calling into question those 200 digs.
For sure.
This is the guy that you're riding your hat on, and all these reports are based on largely on digs that he conducted. You got to question those too. So then the Smithsonian Institution went back on my blog, deleted their previous post, and they took out the part about John Emmert, but they said the stone is still a fake. This is how fraudulent this BS is. And it's just astounding. Okay, let me finish real quick. So what happened then was Leslie went back to the Eastern Band of Cherokee and they put up $10,000 to have that obelisk made out of a very rare and expensive green granite, and invited all of his known relatives, descendants that we could round up. And that's a picture of him in the foreground. And we had a dedication ceremony of a marked monument for John Emmert that has on its four sides a symbol that acknowledges his service in the Civil War, his service as a constable, and as a brother Mason with Shelby Lodge number 162 in Tennessee, and as the discoverer of the Bat Creek stone. The reason this is important is because this is the guy that the Smithsonian Institution is throwing under the bus for creating this fake artifact. But I can tell you, to become a member of law enforcement, you need to be vetted. Your background is vetted. I can also tell you, as a Freemason, you are also very carefully vetted before you can become a brother Mason. So by disparaging the reputation of this person many decades after his death is shameful, and the Smithsonian Institution should issue an apology for their ridiculous behavior. So here we are at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian. That is the artifact. That's the display right there. There's a picture of the artifact.
What year is that from? Because when I was there, it wasn't on display.
Oh, it's not on display now?
Well, in what year was it? 2014, in December 2014.
This would have been 2011, I think.
Oh, okay. So maybe they took it down. I don't know.
Yeah. And then this is Don Rose and I celebrating at that time what we thought was a real positive plus and a victory, frankly. And then there I am standing next to the monument. So that's it. That's
okay. So one question I had, which really is a question of information, like I'm not challenging you or anything.
No, go ahead. I'm just pushing back on you. I'm getting fired up.
You should push back. That's good.
Okay, exit out, Scott. Exit out.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Your key contention is that the original scratches had this orange clay, and therefore the ones that don't have the orange clay, it's because number one, it was polished, and number two, there was weather.
No, the reason
the sides are polished. Sorry.
No, the polish had nothing to do with removing the clay in the original inscription. It was weathering in a wet burial mound.
So how does something weather in the ground? And I'm not a geologist. Like I read that, I'm like, don't things weather when they're on the surface?
No. We can get all kinds of different weathering processes. You can have secondary deposits that build. You have groundwater solutions that are percolating through the ground that are leaching out materials and mobilizing them and redepositing them in other places.
Okay.
That's probably what we had going on here.
Okay.
So yeah, no, this happens. And of course it depends on the depth, it depends on the climate, it depends on the soil type. There's all kinds of variables that will impact the type of weathering that happens above, at, and below grade.
Okay, so that's something I'm just not an expert in, and I read that. I was curious. So
No, that's fine.
it was really impressive that you brought the electron microscope. It wasn't clear to me what the electron microscope taught us that we didn't get from the visual reflecting microscope.
Well, we were able to get elemental analysis of whatever it was that was we put the probe on, so we could understand exactly what the chemical makeup of that particular clay was, of what the iron oxide rind was, and so we understood the geochemistry of the artifact.
That's how you determined, and you have okay, I see. That's in your report where you say it's like 50 something percent. So that's based on the electron microscope. But it didn't, so did the electron microscope add anything or clarify anything as far as the weathering or as far as the evidence of the antiquity of the object? That's my question.
I mean, it helped us better understand, what the composition of that secondary material was that was produced during the scratch that was no longer present under the original inscription. So and when you looked at that one photo, there were some dark areas that actually was iron that was in the rock. So that whole premise that my statement that it was an ironstone concretion, I mean, as a geologist, I've looked at, innumerable examples of this. I know what I'm looking at, but in this case, we had to do the confirmation. Even though I knew exactly what I was looking for, and what I was looking at, I still have to do the work to confirm what its composition was, and it was what I thought it was.
Okay, so the two scratches, the new scratches that were done, how much deeper are they? Deeper than the scratches of the inscription, or more superficial?
No, they're consistent with the with the original inscription. Let's just call the Paleo-Hebrew, or whatever you want to call it, inscription, the original inscription. There were areas that were deeper, but it really won't matter, because once you get through that rind, you hit that clay material, and you're going to get that same step fracturing build up. It's kind of like if you take your finger and you run it through wet sand and you get those little step fractures. That's analogous to what we see here, but it really doesn't matter how deep you go. Some areas of the original inscription were shallower than those scratches, some were deeper, but most of them were about the same depth.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to ask this question, is why is it that Emmert would get the stone and recognize that it was polished, see that it was polished after it had been in the ground for all these centuries, but yet it didn't look obviously polished to you when it would have been in a more stable environment?
Well, when I first looked at it, I didn't think to comment on the polish. It was Emmert who brought it to my attention, so I'll give him credit. But then once I looked at it, it was obvious.
Okay.
I was singularly focused on the inscribed characters. I wasn't really looking at the other part of the stone. And, shame on me. I should have paid more attention initially. But after I read his field notes, I went polished. And I went back and looked at it. And I said, I'll be damned. There it is.
Okay.
So this would be an interesting follow-up test to document what an unpolished stone from that area made of that same material with the same rind, what it looks like, as opposed to a polished one. Because I don't know, I have no idea, right?
I'll tell you this, it wouldn't look a hell of a lot different. It probably would have been more shiny, because when you find these ironstone concretions that still have that dark brown, blackish brown colored rind on them, oftentimes they're really shiny. So, I kind of wonder if the person that did that, there may have actually been a ritualistic reason for polishing it, right? Mm-hmm. To preserve or to somehow protect this sacred inscription that ended up going inside of a burial mound. I don't think it's a stretch to say that there was likely some aspect of ritual that was involved with interring this stone beneath the skull of this person that was important enough to receive a burial at all. So, obviously that's speculation, but when you see things like a polish or even an inscribed stone like that, it begs questions, right? These humanities aspects of this whole artifact and everything surrounding it. Why did they do this? Who was it that did this? And was there ritual associated with it? In my heart and in my own head, I'm absolutely convinced that there was. And maybe the polish was one piece of that. Of course, we'll never know because it's speculation, but it's fun speculation.
So another follow-up related question is, so in archaeology of Israel that I know about, right, I much more about, they'll talk about how an ancient artifact will have patina from being weathered. It's kind of like this crusted layer. This came up when they were talking about the James, the brother of Jesus ossuary, which nobody disputed the ossuary was 2,000 years old. The dispute was the inscription on it maybe was made more recently.
I'm very, very, very familiar with the Talpiot tomb and that
okay.
and that work with
Okay.
with Simca and Charlie Pellegrino, Shimon Gibson, and Jerry Lutkin. You don't know these names.
I know
some of these.
Well, I know some of those names. I don't know all of them.
Any case, yeah. So one of the things, there's a lot that I could do to help these guys understand those ossuaries and the geochemical fingerprint of the Terra Rosa soil that flowed into the tomb that was used to help validate the James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus ossuary. This is the exact kind of work that I do. And, bravo to the guys that did that work. And actually, I've written quite a bit about the Talpiot tomb that you might enjoy.
So shouldn't we expect some patina on the Bat Creek inscription? And here, maybe I'm completely wrong. Like you described it as weathered. I would expect after all that time, there'd be some layer like a film, no?
No, it depends on a lot of factors, right? In some cases, things buried on the ground are going to develop secondary deposits, a patina, if you will. But in other cases, you're going to have the opposite, where it's actually going to take away material from the artifact. It's going to clean it out, if you will, or weather it in a way that's not going to leave secondary material that, like it did in the case of the Talpiot tomb. But you're talking about two completely different environmental situations.
Sure.
So it all depends. I mean, it depends. That's why, you have to look at every artifact, every situation on a case-by-case basis, because they're not all the same. And in many cases, what appears to be similar geologically could be very different based on one or two little things. I mean, every situation is unique, and you have to take them on a case-by-case basis, start big, work small, and see what the data tells you.
So here's an experiment I'm gonna suggest, not necessarily for you, but for your critics.
Okay.
This should be really easy to determine if using this, and maybe I'm wrong, you'll tell me why I'm wrong. So if they were to go to that area and collect other stones like this, iron concretions, you called it, I think?
Ironstone concretions.
Ironstone concretions with a similar sort of rind, and then scratch them with various implements that could have been around in the 1880s.
I already did it.
Okay, so where are those results? Because I haven't seen that study.
Well, I
need to publish. So that's something you can publish in a peer-reviewed journal.
Oh, for God's sakes! This is so basic stuff. It was already done. It was already done on the artifact. I mean, there it was. I mean, that's a one-to-one. That's the most.
No, but on other. So your whole assumption, or the way I read it, the central contention that you're making is that there should be iron clay in the older, or should be. If it was modern, there would be iron clay and orange clay in it, excuse me. And the fact that there's no orange clay suggests that this was weathered over centuries in the ground. So do some tests, and maybe you've done these, but your opponents should do some tests and show he's wrong about this assumption or he's right about this assumption. How do we explain it, right? Or what's our excuse, right? They'll still come up with an excuse about why it's not ancient, but at least they'll have done that work, right? Because right now, I don't know what the answer is. You may know the answer because you've done it.
Why do you think I went out in the field and went and visited the location that I already knew was underwater? People said, well, why did you go there when you knew you couldn't get to the actual site? I said, I didn't need to get to the actual site. I just had to get into the area to see if the geology was consistent. In other words, was that stone, that Bat Creek stone, that ironstone concretion that inscription was carved into, could that rock have come from the area? And The answer is yes. Now, does that
So
prove
you've
that
done
it-
tests where you've scratched a different stone and then looked
Yeah.
under a microscope?
Yeah, I did the same thing, but I mean, it was
Okay.
so obvious to me, it wasn't worth
Well, it's
even.
obvious to you, but obviously not to others. So have you published those results somewhere, even on your website or anywhere? If not, please do, right? Present the data and let scholars give their excuse of why it's not valid, or
It's
maybe they'll
all
accept
there.
it.
It's all there on the Bat Creek stone. It's already done right there. And look, the only thing, I mean, I think I see what you're saying. You know, if I take another ironstone concretion, will it
Right.
do the same thing as this rock? The answer is yes. But
Okay.
by testing another rock, really, to me, doesn't push the ball down the field at all. Because
Wasn't that a
here's-
scientific control that we want to?
well, the control is the stone. It's right here. The control is right here. And that is the best control sample that you could possibly have. We have test scratches right here, and then we have the inscription. And, you know, maybe I pick another ironstone concretion and it behaves slightly differently, but I would always go back to the source material, which is that rock, right?
Or you could pick multiple different stones, which maybe have different composition. I
Understood.
don't know.
Understood. But
That's
to
a
me-
proposal. I don't know. It's an
No,
idea.
I appreciate that, and I see where you're going. But to me, we have the tests are performed right there. The Smithsonian did it for us, and you can even make the argument that the Smithsonian, in their haste to try to prove this thing a hoax, went out of their way to test the scratches, which ended up being used by me to actually help prove the authenticity. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. This was a really
This was
great,
amazing.
an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
I've got a million more questions I would love to ask you, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah,
Folks,
I got to
wanna
get going here pretty soon, but listen, this is fun, guys. And I just want to say one thing. I love the pushback and I love the banter. I think this is healthy. And I really appreciate that, you know, that we can have this and kind of get after each other a little bit, but it's all done in the spirit of respect and trying to get to the truth. And I love it. So I'm happy to do this anytime.
Yeah,
So
I
I just
appreciate
wanna-
you dialoguing with us and giving us more information. That I definitely got more information than what I read in the written report. So that's really valuable.
So I'm highlighting here real quick the episode, if you want to watch it on YouTube,
Yeah.
about the Bat Creek Stone on America on Earth. I also want to point out to people that Scott has a blog that I want you to direct you to. We'll have links in the description
Oh,
to
I
both
didn't
of
know
these as well. And I want to thank you so much, Scott, for coming on. I always end at, you know, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews. And Nehemia, how do you close your program?
Well, I mean, I think in this particular case, I just thank you for being so
Yeah.
willing to tolerate my many questions and bringing up your critics, some of who weren't generous. They weren't parsimonious, or they were parsimonious in their, because you should be given credit for finding the original notes. You should be given credit for doing the tests you did. Whether they agree with your conclusions or not, okay, fair enough. You don't have to agree with his conclusions, but he's done some tests and found some information, some sources you didn't have, and he's pushed the story forward. I think that's really valuable. And let's acknowledge there what we can acknowledge, even if you don't agree with him. And thank you for being willing to discuss that with us.
Hey, thank you. You know, I guess, you know, the people that are critical, you know, they expect people to respect, you know, their expertise, their knowledge, their findings and their conclusions. And I just, I find it disappointing that they can't respect the fact that I'm recognized as an expert in my field. I've published a lot of my material. I follow proper scientific method. And frankly, I don't have a horse in the race. I don't reach these conclusions because I want them to be real. There's plenty of other artifacts out there that would support, you know, the narrative that I would like to see brought forth as truth. And unfortunately, some of these things I would love to have been authentic. I was the one that said, hey, they're not. They're fake or they're modern. And these weren't made by somebody in the historical past. So I call it as I see it. And there are some times when I don't have enough data and I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. If that's the appropriate response, I'll say it. But if I say that I think something is real, I believe I have the evidence to support it. And I appreciate anybody that wants to push back. But, don't just sit there and call me names and tell me what you think. Show me your evidence to back up your opinion. Otherwise, frankly, your opinion is meaningless. And because that's what I do, I have to put the evidence forth. I've done it in this case. I've done it with the runestone and many other artifacts, including the ones that weren't authentic. So I think that's important.
I'm actually looking forward to that, to you coming back on and telling us about the fakes, because that's really fascinating too.
Oh, yeah. I got some good ones. Have you ever heard of the Burroughs Cave?
Yeah,
I have not.
Artifacts?
I haven't.
Yep. There's a lot of people in the Latter-day Saint world that use the Burroughs Cave stuff a lot. Wayne May does, of course, of Ancient American Magazine. So I did an episode on the Michigan relics, which you haven't been able to get access to. But
no, I've looked at some of them, but I wasn't able to get access. I have looked at some of them. I was not able to get access at the University of Michigan because I was doing the show, and they were afraid to see what would happen.
Yeah, so we'll have
I don't have an opinion on those. I have not been able to do enough work to draw a definitive conclusion. So
I'd like to see what I can do to help you with that, because I'm connected to people, to the family that used to own those relics, and they were given certain promises that those items would be able to be investigated and studied, and they've reneged on that promise. So this might be an opportunity for you to use that as a calling card to look at those objects, because I'd be fascinated to hear what you think.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, this is a great episode, man. This was awesome. Looking forward to having you back on the program, Scott. You're a great human being. Thanks for putting up with us. This was a relatively easy episode for me because Nehemia was doing all the questioning. It was pretty good, actually.
You were awesome, man. I
thank you. No, this has been fascinating.
Here and get after it, because in all seriousness, there is some stuff that I'm working on right now that you need to know that I think you could be a tremendous help on. And I just have a quick question. Are you familiar with a Hebrew scholar by the name of Rabbi Mark Samath?
I'm not familiar with him, no.
Okay, you might want to look this up. He wrote a book called The Name. And I can't forget, I forget the subtitle, but it has—
How do you spell his name?
Sameeth. He published this book in 2020. It's called The Name.
Okay. I'm definitely interested in that.
Yeah, the secret Hebrew name of God in the Hebrew priesthood. That's not what it is. The dual gendered name of God. Yes. And there's a reason why it's so important to me, because there is a symbol on the Kensington runestone called the hooked X. And it's being used for the letter A, but in my mind, it looks like a straight line stonemason's version of the Hebrew Aleph. And I've done enough research into Hebrew mysticism to know that the Aleph is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet that, amongst many other things, stands for the oneness of God. And so you could make the argument that it's also being used as an acknowledgement of deity. And there's a lot more to this that I can talk about. But my research, I came to the conclusion. In fact, I wrote a book called The Hooked X, Key to the Secret History of North America. And my belief is that it also represents the ideology of the Knights, the true ideology of the Knights Templar, and their ideological and biological ancestors, which go through the Essene priesthood back in the 1st century, Jesus and Mary Magdalene and all of that. And it represents their true ideology in the belief of a single deity that has male and female aspects that are equal. And it's interesting, Dr. Mark Samath, Rabbi Mark Samath, came to the conclusion that the ancient Hebrew word of Yahweh actually is 2 words, and you split it in half and you pronounce them inside out. And the English translation of that is Hui, and it represents an equal male and female aspect of the Godhead. And this was supposedly the ancient secret of the Hebrew priesthood. Now, look it up, read the book. And what happens is in his, he writes this. It's a quick read. It's only like 150 pages. It's really good stuff. But the ancient word that he talks about in the Hebrew priesthood of Yod-He Vav-He, which was He Vav-He prior to that, which I think in Hebrew letters spells Eve, which is feminine, but that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, he writes this book as if he was the first person to make this discovery in modern times. And then he has a subsequent chapter at the end of the book where he says, guess what? It turns out I wasn't the first guy. And then he talks about the person who actually was an archivist at the Roman Catholic Church who made that discovery in the early 1800s. But later on, and of course, the Roman Catholic Church, when he published this paper, they said, no, that's not going anywhere. And they suppressed it. But eventually, one of his students took up the mantle of this research, and he passed it on to a Freemason by the name of Albert Mackey, who wrote the encyclopedia in the 1850s, I believe, 1860s, of the Masonic Encyclopedia, and a history of Freemasonry was written by Albert Mackey. And he talks about this discovery in that book, but I never recognized it until Samath's book came out. And sure enough, there it was. So I find it interesting that we have these ancient Hebrew words for deity in this case, and it eventually dovetails with Freemasonry, which dovetails with my work with the Knights Templar. And there's no question that our gentle craft of Freemasonry evolved directly from medieval Knights Templarism. And of course, Knights Templarism goes back even further to the 1st century, to Egypt and beyond, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Oh
But
my
if
gosh.
that was the
Okay.
exact same path.
We're ending on this? Well, folks,
Yeah,
those
really,
were-
like, wow, what's
you
that
guys
about?
have your assignment, right? So get after it, guys.
okay. Well, Scott, we're looking forward to having you back on. Thanks again for joining us. And folks, leave your comments. Love to hear them. We'll talk to you
All
later.
right. Thanks.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.